Welcome back. In this episode, we will cover endpoints, as well as logs, for once your logic is published. This episode assumes you already know the basics of Elyx, like node executions, operations, and connecting values. If not, we recommend you go watch the previous episode where we covered the Canvas basics. An endpoint is a gateway so the internet can access your application. You can have as many endpoints as you want. Traditionally, one endpoint is paired with one internal action of your application. But there's no limit to what you can make an endpoint do. It is effectively an external trigger to a part of your logic. For example, send email with this form data, or order a pizza, or get the latest news. In Elyx, you can add endpoint nodes to the canvas, give them a method, like get or post, based on whether you want to retrieve data or create new data, and add a path, which is just a way to identify one endpoint from another, and it will be part of the resulting URL once the project is published. You can give any value to the path, as long as it meets URL standards, like no spaces or specific special characters. It must also start with a slash, but it is good practice to keep it simple and semantically relevant to what the endpoint does. For example, if the endpoint registers a new user, we could call the endpoint's path /user, together with the post method indicating that it creates data. For retrieving the user, in another endpoint, we could use the get method with the same path. But you can also embed path parameters in your path's value. You do this by creating a new path segment, which is a section of the path that starts and ends with the slash character. Then, add a keyword between curly brackets. For example, email. This means that this segment of the path value is dynamic. So we could retrieve a user by its email. Then, regardless of whether this endpoint is called from the internet as user/example@email.com or user/some other email.com, it will still be routed to the correct endpoint. And you will be able to read the path parameter value to use it within your endpoint and retrieve the correct user record. Again, this is just an example, and you can make your endpoint look like and do whatever you want. You can make your path have as many segments as you want, separated by the slash character. You can have a very long and descriptive one, or many subsegments. It is up to you. But if there is a dynamic path parameter, it should be alone in its dedicated segment. Elyx will validate the format of your path value and let you know if there is anything wrong. Now, your endpoint is ready, but it doesn't do anything. As you can see, the endpoint contains two default connected nodes. Green nodes are triggers. They are always the initial entry point for logic. They cannot be connected to from any earlier node. They are, by design, the very beginning of a branch. This other red node is a termination node. It is used to end the current execution run and return some data to whomever executed the trigger. In other words, it is the output of the full logic branch and not just a specific node. It is the end of the branch. In this case, it defines the data returned from this endpoint when called from somewhere else on the internet. So let's connect some nodes and make this endpoint send me an email. This way, I don't have to come to the canvas to execute my automations every time. But rather, I can use this endpoint to execute it from another app. For example, we could make a form on a website and submit some text from a contact form into our endpoint. This is often a single field to configure in most no-code website builders, where you will have to paste your endpoint's URL. Then, we will use what we have learned to send myself an email with the values received. This means that our email address doesn't have to be visible anywhere in our website. To start, we need to extract the data sent by the form to the endpoint. In an endpoint, this data is available in the body input. Usually, the format of the data sent by forms is JSON, where there is one property for every field in the form. So we will use one operation called read property from object. We will start from the execution socket of the endpoints trigger. Click and drag to create a new connected operation. We will release and type to search for the operation, read property from object. There it is. As you can see, Elyx automatically checks whether your logic is valid. It shows you what's wrong under these warning icons directly where they occur. Or you can find all the validation problems in the canvas in the toolbar to the right. In this case, we're being told that some values are missing, but also that this node is somehow unreachable, even though its execution is connected to the trigger on the left. That is because Elyx doesn't know which node would have to be executed first after the trigger. If the termination were to execute first, the full execution would end, and our new operation would not get a chance to run. To ensure that doesn't happen, we must make sure that the termination node is also connected to the success socket of our new operation. This guarantees that it executes only after the operation ended. We can now remove the redundant connection from the trigger to the termination, although it's not strictly necessary. Now, we must connect the body input of the endpoint into the operation's data input. Then, we add the name of the property that we want to extract as a text value in the second field. Form submissions usually have the properties in the data named after the input fields in the form. In this case, message is the field name. Your form might have differently named fields. Finally, after this operation, we want to use the send email operation. Again, starting from the success socket of the previous operation. The send email operation requires a few inputs. The from label, which in this case does not matter because it is an email to ourselves. The to email address, I will also give my Elyx work email. The subject of the email, and the body. But the body, we wanted to take from the main output of the previous operation. Because remember, we wanted to use the submitted value from the form data. Importantly, you might see that we still have one value missing, the connection value. Elyx integrates with over 200 third-party services, and when you use their nodes, you will have to connect to one of your accounts in those services. In this case, if we try to add the value, we will be redirected to Google account signing page. And that is it. Our logic is ready, and our Gmail account is connected. We can see that we don't have any more validation errors on our logic. Now, let's give it a test JSON value, which matches what we expect the web form will submit to the endpoints body, and then we execute it. We see each node executing one after the other. And it all looks good. I can confirm I received an email on my personal account. We also don't need to return any data as this endpoint's output, but if we wanted to, we would do so with the response body output of the termination node. We are done. If we want to make this endpoint actually available to the internet, we must publish the project for the first time. We can do that here on the toolbar. Elyx will then take care of provisioning the cloud infrastructure necessary, running your logic in it, and creating a gateway to the internet so other apps can reach your endpoints. After publishing, you can find your new endpoints and any other cloud infrastructure owned by this project in the resources dialog from the toolbar. Here, you can navigate to any live endpoints, and there is a tool where you can execute them to test your live logic hosted in the cloud. This is different from testing in the canvas because you are now executing your endpoints over the internet, the same way other apps will do it. You can therefore only use this tool to test endpoints once the project has in the past published endpoints that still remain live. Here you can see the logs of any of the executions of your live endpoints, or any other resource which runs any of your logic. That is because your endpoints might be executed hundreds of times in the background, based on the traffic of your application. But you can come back later to inspect each run and see what happened. You can select the execution on the left based on the time it occurred. Logs are just lines of text. Specifically, Elyx will show you one line before an operation executed, with the input values it received, and one line after, with whatever data it outputted. Then, the next operation, and then the next, just like in the canvas. You can identify each operation in the logs by their name or unique identifier, which you can find in their canvas menu. And that is all for this episode. We have mentioned publishing a project. In the next episode, we focus specifically on that. Publishing a project is how we make it available to the world and your users. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so YouTube notifies you when Elyx posts more tutorials or announcements. See you in the next video.